Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video I'm going to be covering the top 5 most underrated commanders printed in 2023. I recently made a video covering the top 10 most powerful commanders printed in 2023, and the top rated comment on that video was asking for an underrated commander guide, which I think is very reasonable considering there were 398 new commanders printed in the last year, so you can be forgiven if you don't know all of them off the top of your head. I'm going to be defining underrated as commanders with less than 1,000 decks showing up on EDH Rec. I think this is a good cutoff because the most popular commander printed last year, Sauron the Dark Lord, is pushing 10,000 decks right now, and most of the powerful commanders that I was discussing in the previous video are around 9,000 to 5,000 deck submissions. So when you go under 1,000, you're really coming to commanders that most people haven't heard about. But before we begin, a quick reminder that you can purchase these sweet underrated commanders over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. I'm going to be ranking the commanders from most to least popular, so the most popular one is going to be at number 5 and the least popular one is going to be at number 1. This is not a power ranking scale, it's just they're all really good. Alright, we begin with the most popular of the underrated commanders. It has 985 decks submitted so far. This is Legolas Master Archer, and this is mono green Voltron Control. So Legolas is a 3-mana 1/4 legendary creature elf archer with reach, and it has 2 triggered abilities. The first is if you cast a spell that targets Legolas, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then if you cast a spell that targets a creature you don't control, Legolas deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. So you target Legolas, you pump up Legolas with +1/+1 counters, you target a creature you don't control with a spell, then suddenly Legolas is going to be dealing its damage and taking out opposing creatures. So the goal here is going to be targeting Legolas to pump him up and grow him, and then targeting our opponent's stuff so Legolas can shoot down opposing creatures, just machine gunning them, clearing the path and letting us just Voltron kill our opponents. So the bread and butter of the Legolas deck is going to be fight spells. These are spells that target Legolas and target an opponent's creature, and then Legolas either fights that creature or just straight up just deals damage to that creature. And this is going to pump up Legolas because it targets Legolas, and it's going to take out potentially 2 creatures. First, the creature we're going to be fighting, Legolas is going to hopefully kill that, and then it's going to trigger Legolas, and Legolas gets to deal its damage to another creature, potentially killing a second creature as well. So stuff like Titanic Brawl is going to be fantastic. It's instant speed, fight spell, and if Legolas already has a +1/+1 counter on it, it costs just 1 mana instead of 2. Windswift Slice is another great one. If Legolas is way bigger than the creature we're trying to kill, then the excess damage is going to turn into 1/1 elf warrior tokens, and then Contest of Claws is another great one. It's sorcery speed, however, now the excess damage turns into a discover ability, so it's card advantage. Equally important are the 1-mana cantrip spells that target either our creature or opponent's creatures. Stuff like Charge Through, Irresistible Prey, and Viridescent Wisps. What they do is kind of irrelevant. It's just the fact that they're 1-mana, instant speed, draw card spells that target something. So either we target Legolas and grow him early on, or once Legolas is already big, we can target our opponent's creatures and Legolas can snipe something down for 1 mana, and we get to draw cards so it replaces itself. Then the rest of the deck is just here to support that concept. Since we're a Voltron deck, we really need to protect Legolas at all costs, so cards like Tamio's Safekeeping are going to be essential here. They also pump up Legolas at the same time, but giving stuff indestructible and hexproof is really crucial to keep Legolas around and make sure that our deck keeps going. Also, since we're going to be targeting Legolas so much, Season of Growth is going to be fantastic because it turns basically all those spells into card draw spells, and then stuff that targets Legolas for extra value like Hunter's Prowess are going to be great here too because they're going to draw us a ton of cards while also growing Legolas in the process. Now Legolas is really sweet, but I have to give you a warning that I have a deck very similar to Legolas. It's Gargos Vicious Watcher. It's not a Hydra deck, it's just Voltron Control, much like Legolas is doing right now. And I don't play it that often because it is very mean. It is very efficient, very, very strong, but it's too strong and it like suppresses the rest of the table. So I only take it out for special occasions. And I think Legolas is going to be the same thing too. This is a commander that your opponents are going to fear, and rightly so, because it basically means if Legolas is doing his thing, your opponents don't get to play the game if they rely on creatures. So just keep that in mind. It's a kind of mean commander, very, very powerful, and very, very fun, but you have to make sure that your table is okay to handle it. Next on our list with 906 submitted decks is Gylwain Casting Director. This is a Selesnya Auras deck, but it has a focus primarily on creatures. Basically, all the cards in your 99 want to be creatures because Gylwain gives each non-token creature that is entering the battlefield under your control a role token. And role tokens are a special type of enchantment that is unique to Wilds of Eldraine. They're aura tokens that enchant creatures, and each of them do something very small. They almost all just give them +1/+1 and then something very minor like Ward 1 or Trample or something like that. So Gylwain is 3 mana, 2/3, legendary creature human bard. When it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a role token attached to it, a sorcerer role, or a monster role. So all your creatures, as soon as Gylwain's on the battlefield, all your creatures are going to be entering the battlefield with aura tokens just attached to them for free, which is super mana efficient and can allow for really, really zany, highly efficient shenanigans. So stuff that we're going to be doing is like Umbra Mystic is going to turn all those role tokens into totem armor. So when those creatures would possibly die, instead you just remove the aura token off them and they live, which is freaking amazing in terms of board resiliency. Also, each time your creature is going to be entering the battlefield and you make a role token, well, then Tanglespan Lookout is going to be drawing you a card for each one of those. And also, all enchanted creatures are considered modified. So if you're going to be attacking with them, Kodama of the Westry is going to be ramping you out a silly amount. So Gylwain is just fantastic. You just want to run a bunch of creatures. All of them are going to come with auras for free stapled onto them. And then there's so many ways to take advantage of that. And then you can also go like full Enchantress with like non-creature support cards. Winds of Wrath is going to be a one-sided board wipe free because all your creatures are enchanted and it's going to destroy all non-enchanted creatures. So it's going to kill your opponent's creatures. Sage's Reverie is going to draw you a ton of cards because all your creatures are going to have auras on them. So Sage's Reverie is going to draw cards for each aura you have on the battlefield. Kutsil is going to be drawing you a bunch of cards, and Archon of the Wild Rose is going to turn all your creatures into base power and toughness 4/4s with flying. All of this is just absolutely fantastic. So yeah, Gylwain is pretty awesome. It's built like a creature deck, but it functions mostly like an aura creature hybrid deck. It's very, very powerful, very, very sweet. Next up, with 905 deck submissions, is Anim Pakal Thousandth Moon, which is basically Krenko 10th Street Kingpin, but Boros and 10 times better. So this is a 3 mana Boros 1/2 legendary creature human soldier that says whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on her. So Anim doesn't even need to attack. You just need to attack with anything, and then you're going to put a counter on her, and then you're going to make gnome artifact creature tokens that are attacking. So she snowballs out of control very, very quickly. In a couple turns, if she's not dealt with, you're just going to flood the board and take out the entire table. So the first thing you want to be doing with Anim is you want to be adding +1/+1 counters onto her. Some of the best options to put +1/+1 counters on Anim are stuff like Rosie Cotton of South Lane. Whenever you're making tokens, such as Anim making tokens herself, you're going to put that many +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal with Rosie Cotton, and then it's going to make even more tokens the next time you attack with Anim or anything else. And then Cathar's Crusade is just going to put a dozen of +1/+1 counters, just not only on Anim, but all your other creatures as well too. So you have an instantly lethal army. You can also just, triple the token production other ways, like Ogier Tack. Instead of making just one token, you make triple the amount of tokens. So you could just go crazy that way as well too. So it's very, very easy and quick to just overwhelm the table with any number of combination of cards here. And since the tokens are artifacts as well, you can do really fun shenanigans like easily flipping Thousand Moon Smithy to make gnome structs. You can pump all your creatures that are 1/1s into becoming 3/3s with Illustrious Wanderglyph and also pump out more tokens that way too. Also, whenever your tokens are entering the battlefield and they're artifacts, so Reckless Fireweaver is just going to burn out the rest of the table on top of all the combat damage you're going to be dealing as well too. So Anim Pakal is very aggro, very quick, very fun. You can build her 1,000 different ways because she's an artifact deck, she's a token deck, she's a +1/+1 counter deck, so there's so many ways to mix and match around her. Incredibly powerful, very, very scary. I love her. All right, out of all the underrated commanders on this list today, this one truly slipped under the radar. This is Moira and Teshar. This commander has only 261 decks despite being printed at the beginning of the year in January with Phyrexia All Will Be One. This is Orzhov Historic Reanimator, and it is really, really strong. So Moira and Teshar are 5 mana Orzhov 4/5 legendary creature Phyrexian Spirit Bird. It has flying and it says whenever you cast a historic spell, return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. So basically, this is free reanimation whenever you're casting historic spells. It doesn't even have to be a historic thing that you're targeting for reanimation. And you get to sneak attack it. It has haste, you get to attack with it if it is a creature or whatever, but the downside is that it gets exiled at the end of turn, so you only get to play with your toy for a single turn. But we have a lot of ways of getting around that restriction. So first and foremost, we want a deck loaded with historic spells, and we want to put them in the graveyard. So easy stuff, we can run stuff like Buried Alive, we can tutor up the best things to reanimate and put it directly into our graveyard. We have historic permanents that we can cycle away, like Angel of the Ruins, which has plain cycling, and then we can either cast it later to trigger Moira and Teshar, or we could just reanimate it later and then exile 2 artifacts and or enchantments and smash somebody for 5 in the air. And we have really cool Historic Matters cards that we can be loading up on as well too. Gandalf the White is a historic spell. It gives our legendary and artifact spells flash. And on top of that, it also is a Panharmonicon for our historic shenanigans. So we get to double reanimate with Moira and Teshar, and all our other legendary creatures and artifacts are going to be doing extra cool things too. Like I said, we don't have to lose our reanimated permanents forever. If we blink them, for example, with Teleportation Circle, they do get exiled. They go into the exile zone, but then we bring them back onto the battlefield right afterwards. So we keep them permanently, or in response to the exile trigger at our end of our turn, we can just end the turn with Sundial of the Infinite and keep it forever that way too. And we can load up in other ways, double up on this Historic Matters shenanigans with stuff like Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. So not only are we reanimating stuff with Moira and Teshar and maybe big things with that, we can reanimate small things with just baby Teshar and keep that forever as well. So Moira and Teshar are very, very strong. They're Orzhov Historic Matters Reanimator, and I think Blink is a great way to add a sub-theme to the deck that works really well with everything Moira and Teshar are doing. It's actually wild to think that I've never seen Moira and Teshar out in the wild, despite how powerful it looks like on paper. So maybe I have to do a budget brewer on it or something to just get its name out a little bit more. But the most underrated commander of 2023 at only 241 deck submissions so far is Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. And yeah, I'm sure being from Lost Caverns of Ixalan near the end of the year probably helps lower its numbers a bit, but we'll check in a year and see how it's doing. Inti, Seneschal of the Sun is super fun. This is mono red discard matters and also exile matters. So 2 really cool themes locked in together on just a 2-drop commander, and that's super exciting. So for 2 mana, you get a 2/2 legendary creature human knight that says whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. And whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile a top card of your library. You may play that card card until your next end step. So whenever we're discarding stuff, we're generating card advantage. It has impulse draw restrictions. We can only cast it until our next end step, but we have really cool ways of playing around that. And also we're casting stuff from exile, so we're gonna have synergies with that as well too. So first and foremost, this is a discard deck. We're gonna be getting a lot of value from discarding cards because every single card we discard is basically card advantage with Inti out. But the trick here is we want to be discarding our cards ideally not on our turn, because if we discard on an opponent's turn, we have all of our next turn to have all of that mana available to cast whatever we exile with Inti. So for example, cycling is absurdly good in this deck because cycling means discard a card, then draw a card, and you can do that at instant speed. So Tectonic Reformation, giving all our land cards in our hand, cycling is fantastic. And if we don't have any lands in our hand, we can just cycle it away instead. If we cycle it not on our turn, we get to untap on our upcoming turn and then have all our mana available to cast our exiled spells, which is fantastic. Or like Big Score 2, we get to basically cycle some cards away from our hand, draw new cards instead, make some treasure, and then utilize that treasure to cast all the exiled spells. And then we also have stuff that want to be discarded, like Squee, Goblin, Nabomb. You get to discard it, and then it just returns back to our hand for free every single time. That's super cute. I love it to death. And then we come to discard payoff. So we're doing all this discarding, and the biggest payoff here is obviously our commander Inti, which is going to give us a bunch of card advantage, but we can get even more advantage out of payoffs like Currency Converter, which turns the discarded cards into treasures or creatures, for example, or Surly Badgesaur. It allows us to grow our creature, fight other creatures, make more treasures, all that good stuff as we're discarding cards. And then we also have Exile Matters as a sub-theme. So casting stuff from exile sometimes provides certain payoffs, like Delayed Blast Fireball. It generally deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. But if we cast it from exile, such as with Inti, we're dealing 5 damage instead. And that's absolutely fantastic. I recently played Inti on a Commander Clash and it was super awesome. I won't go into spoilers here, but if you want to see the Commander in action, check that out. I'll have a link to it in the video description below. I think one weakness of Inti is that the Commander doesn't lend itself directly to any sort of way of closing out the game. Like, yes, it lets you draw into ways of closing out the game, but the Commander itself is a 2/2, and it's not going to, win with combat damage itself very easily, at least. So in the 99, one way I would recommend maybe is doing a Kiki combo. I think that one is a very flavorful way of closing things out with Inti. And also cards like Underworld Breach too. When you're discarding a bunch of cards with Inti and your other discard matters cards, you're gonna have a full graveyard, and surely just dropping an Underworld Breach, you're gonna figure out some way to win the game off that. And that is my top 5 most underrated commanders printed in 2023. Again, there were 398 new commanders printed last year, so there's many more commanders that I could be talking about. So let me know in the comment section below which new commander you enjoyed most from 2023, and maybe I might do unbudget deck tech on the one that I like the most in the near future. We'll have to see. But until then, friends, see ya!